I think the Bank of Japan is in an interesting position. I was surprised at the spring offensive that the government allowed the unions to settle for a much higher price. And I have an unusual view here. It is that the Prime Minister and the Diet and the group he leads within the Diet, they needed to incur the goodwill of the Japanese workforce and people in order to provide support for their becoming more offensive in their military rather than just adhering to the self-defense budget. But now you're hearing Japanese workers complain that the inflationary pressures are too great. So I do believe this will manifest itself in pressure on the Bank of Japan. And at some point, it's not just the currency parity with the US dollar and others. It has to do with whether or not they're going to let inflation settle in at a much higher rate than they're historically used to. But I do think there's a political imperative, given the threats of North Korea, given the Xi Jinping's expansionist saber rattling, that we in the United States are insisting that Japan become more offensively capable. This is what the previous prime minister wanted, what the current prime minister wants, and you have to basically finance the goodwill of the people to get that done. And I believe it's a very different situation than we have here in the United States or elsewhere, particularly in Europe. Right. The European situation is very difficult because they let nominal interest rates stay low for too long to damage the banking system. And now they're trying to correct for that, while the fiscal authorities want to tax the banks now that they're making profits. So there's a lot of disruption worldwide, and even though our politics in the United States are horribly messy, and our senior leadership in the different assemblies like the Senate and the Congress are dysfunctional, the dollar still remains strong, and people want to be here. And unfortunately, that comes at the expense of other countries.
It does, Richard, but do you think that in that sense the BOJ has been behind the curve, and what is keeping them reluctant in actually going all guns blazing and, abandoning the monetary policy that they've been attached to for so many years now, almost 2 decades? Do you think that it is the fear of market dislocation, something that we saw at the start of the year when they actually made the first tweak from 25 basis points to 50?
Yeah, they have a new leader, as we all know. And nonetheless, the way the Bank of Japan works is they're very beholden to the Diet. If you look at the board appointments that are made at the Bank of Japan, it's a very different mechanism than we have here in the United States or other countries have, say the Reserve Bank of Australia, et cetera. And they march to a different drummer. I lived in Japan. I ran my hedge fund out of Japan many years ago in the 1980s. Their domestic savings base is a captured base. And I do think the Bank of Japan has a unique ecosystem. And I would hope that they would abandon this policy after a while. But I can understand why it's taken so very long, particularly the transition with the new leader, to get that done, and given the pressures that are exerted on them by the Diet. So it's very hard for a Westerner, for an American, particularly a Texan, to comprehend that ecosystem. But it's very different than the rest of the world. And yet it's a critical economy. It's an important economy for all of us.